Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, our first one during the season, where we're going to really talk heavily about things that you should be thinking about here in May as you start your installations. Some of you have already started your installations. The rest of you are nearing that point. So what I'm going to talk about here is I'm going to talk about a brief overview of the hardware. We'll talk about selecting where to install the fields, some other things to consider during installation, and then I'll go a little bit over troubleshooting, and then Nick Stahl is going to go over and talk about set points and a lot of the agronomic things you need to consider right now. Starting here with the hardware overview. So these are currently what we're offering here in 2024. We've got the blue CropX SV4 sensor that you're all familiar with. We've got our TD2 telemetry device, which is shown both here with the rain gauge and also shown here with our ET version. We have our Terracin soil sensor, which connects to that TD2. We have the actual ET, which will be talked about a lot in the second half of this webinar. And we do have the rain gauge shown here. So just a brief overview. The SV4 that we unveiled last year has the removable battery and a significantly improved antenna, that pulse paddle you see up there. And we also have markings on the pole for the offset installations at 2 and 4 inches. Nick Stoll is going to talk a lot more about the offset side of things. But if you install it fully, it would measure at 8, 16, and 26 inches and gives us temperature, volumetric water content, and EC readings. The CropX telemetry device, or TD2, is another hardware device that we offered last year. It's easier to install than existing telemetry devices, as it does not require the T-post. It has a removable and rechargeable battery, and of note here, it's the exact same battery that's in the SV4. So if you're operating both devices, you only need one set of parts, whether that's antenna, cable, or battery, since those are all interchangeable there. And it can be utilized with rain gauges, weather stations, pond sensors, soil sensors, and now the ET sensor that we have. Got the CropX rain gauge, or RG1, that we unveiled last year. Plugs into the TD2. Last year was the first year we used it in the US, and we had great feedback on it being very reliable. And it's an important thing to consider for agronomic reasons, as it fills in a gap that a lot of virtual weather networks cannot match. Now, we've seen, especially this last month, that there's been a lot of severe thunderstorm activity over the plains, and you understand that those supercell thunderstorms can often be very isolated. So virtual weather network, while great, can sometimes not accurately gauge if that storm hit your field or not, because those can really be on the mesoscale side of things. Got the Terracin ST1, which is new in the US market this year. It works with the TD2 CropX telemetry and measures soil and temperature at the 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20-inch levels. While it's new to the US market, it has a long and proven track record in Europe through .com, as they've utilized the sensor for many years. And we have CropX actual ET, which I'm going to save for the bottom half of the hour. That's to be talked about. Let the experts talk on that one, and they'll have a lot of information on that for you. So something I really want to talk about right now and is really important is the preseason diagnostics. I've spoken to some people in the field already this year, and they've run into little issues here that would have been solved if they'd done the preseason diagnostic before going out to the field. So it's really important that you do this step now. If you haven't done it, I'd say do this as soon as you get off this webinar. Go ahead and check your equipment so that you make sure that anything that needs to be troubleshot can be done so in your shop before you're going out to the field. And also, it's a great way for checking to make sure that your battery charged during the year. I'll just do a quick demonstration on how you do this. So go into the More tab here. We'll go into Sensor Tools, choose pre-installation. We'll scan the QR code of our sensor here. And what we're doing now is we're using our phone's Bluetooth to go ahead and send a series of signals to the sensor. It's going to tell it to go ahead and take a reading. Even though it's reading air, it could still validate that the readings are going to work, that we're measuring temperature, EC, and VWC. It's going to go ahead and check the battery, and then it's going to go ahead and check the modem. It's going to have the modem communicate with the cell network, and then also make sure it can receive a response from that cell network. And once it's gone ahead and done that, it'll give us a report to see if there's anything that we need to check. This is a great way to make sure your batteries are good, your antennas are good, and that everything is in working order. And this is the response we'll get once the Bluetooth communicates with once the sensor communicates with the tower. And it's telling us here that it can install, but we'd want to charge that battery up for the full season still. Now, things to consider with sensor placement and the actual installation of the probes. Important things to consider here. Consider your soil type and the condition of your soil. Identify your majority soil zone and type, because again, agronomically, if you're only putting one sensor in a field, you don't want to manage off the trouble spots. You want to manage off the spot that is most representative of your field, and that's going to be your majority soil zone. Make sure that you're not installing in an area that's got known compaction issues. Consider the topography and how water is going to flow in your field as well if you're installing in a field that's got a little bit more of a hilly setting there. And also look at your field history. And you can see here, we've got an image here of the SB4 properly installed between two crops. You would want to use the 3-meter long antenna cable that comes with it though, because while this might work in May when that canopy overgrows the crop, this antenna might struggle to communicate if it's not elevated. Other things to consider here with the probe placement, especially with the irrigation system. Make sure you're not installing in wheel tracks. Stay away from the inside two spans of the pivot, and also make sure you're not on the outermost or outer two-most towers. So for example, if you have a 7-span pivot, that 5th span might be a sweet spot for installing the sensor. And if you have a flood irrigated field, consider the flow path and install it on the ridge. And again, an important thing we say is to install between 2 healthy plants for row crops. And again, this is one of the reasons we tell you to install after emergence, is we want to make sure that the crop actually emerges at the point that we're installing, because we want to see how the roots are taking up that water. And if we install in an area where the crop doesn't emerge, we're not going to see the water uptake as we would like to, and we're not going to be able to manage the field correctly. Other things to consider for your own convenience here. Consider road access just in case you need to go out to the field in the season, or even just in September when you're doing extractions. If you're doing a lot of extractions in one day, easy road access can greatly improve your efficiency, because going to the sensor is going to be the longest part of the extraction process for you, especially with the new probes. Consider how many sensors you're going to need. There are cases where 2 sensors in a field very well might make sense for you, especially if you're using variable rate applications. And again, consider when to install. Install it after emergence for the reasons that we went over in the previous slides. Now, important installation checklist, and this is something really want to harp on. So we got the pictures of the flags here. You want to go ahead and mark when you're installing here. You want to mark where you exit off the road, where you enter the field, and also then mark the row itself that the sensor is installed in. And then want to have the bicycle flag. That's not only to find the sensor, but also for the ability to go ahead and use that to get the antenna up higher, so it's going to be above the canopy when that corn grows up in August. So what you want to bring: charged drill batteries. Never hurts to bring more batteries than you'll need, because you can never have enough of them. You bring your drill, the install kit, the auger itself, some water, the CropX hardware, whether that's the TD2 and a probe or the SV4, whatever you're installing, make sure you have that equipment with you. Bring electrical tape, bring the utility flag markers to mark the multiple points we talked about, and that whip flag or anything else that's going to get that you can get that antenna taped to or zip tied to get it above the canopy that's going to grow there, and flagging tape. So when you actually install the sensor in the app, it's a pretty easy process. Something I'm going to say is very important here is, one, make sure your phone's location information is accurate, because when we mark the sensor in the app, we're going to be using your phone's GPS location to flag that. And then also really make sure you draw your fields before you actually go out to the field for installations. It's extremely important that we go ahead and do that, because if you install outside field boundaries, you're going to end up with an unassigned sensor. And just in order to get the best information right away, we want to have that field drawn ahead of time, and preferably drawn with you adding the crop information and the irrigation information as well, so that you can get the crop benefit of the CropX insights. And we'll go ahead and demonstrate what the installation looks like in the app here. So we go ahead here, plus sign, we'll choose sensor. We have a long list of products to choose from, but we'll choose the CropX soil sensor in this example. You're going to go ahead and select your field that you're in. validate your location here. And then we can go ahead and scan the QR code. Now on this page, I'm going to go ahead and quickly just pause here because we can go ahead and put in the sensor nickname. That's not required, but something that is a good idea to do, especially if you're putting more than one sensor in a particular field. Another thing that you can put in here, that's optional, is the installer name. If you have a large operation, you can go ahead and see who installed each sensor. So if you have questions later, you can ask them. And then this is where you choose the depth offset. So if you're doing a installation where you're installing it offset 2 or 4 inches, you would select it here from this pick list. And that's something you might want to consider for some crops. If you want to go ahead and note the soil type, you can do so. But what's really good here is you can mark this moisture level. This is something that's very helpful for you, and we strongly encourage that you go ahead and look at the soil coming off the auger as you're drilling the hole, and go ahead and take note of your moisture level and put that in there, because that can help you determine if you want to use auto or manual set points. And then you submit the installation, and now it's doing the exact same things it did with the pre-install diagnostic. It's actually taking the first soil reading. It's going to check the battery, check the modem, communicate with the tower, and then also make sure it can receive a signal back from the tower in that area. So this will let us know if the installation was successful. And we'll go ahead and receive this message here. And then shortly after this, you'll also receive a notification. Now that notification is important because it's also going to have the initial VWC readings. And it's a good idea to look to see what those initial VWC readings are to validate if they match what you'd expect for that soil. It lets you know if the soil contact is solid there and make sure that you're going to get good data off that field during the season. Some important troubleshooting notes here. If the sensor is not transmitting, it's not always a transmission issue. It could be a battery or power issue. So if you go out to a sensor, first thing I always do is I go ahead and I pull up the BLE scanner under sensor tools. And if I see that sensor show up on the BLE scanner, then I've ruled out a battery or power issue with the sensor. I know it's got good power if it's showing up on Bluetooth. If it's not showing up there, well, then here's what you do for troubleshooting. Remove the battery and reset it, and see if it chirps. If it chirps, you've reset the battery properly. If it doesn't, go ahead and clean the metal contact pieces on both the battery and the sensor with a cloth, and then go ahead and place the battery back in and make sure it chirps. Once it chirps, you should have the power issues corrected, and then again, you should see the sensor on the BLE scanner. Now, if we see it on the BLE scanner and we're still having issues, then it's probably a transmission issue. So what do we do here? Well, what you could do first is check that antenna for rodent or other wildlife damage, as that's the most frequent cause we're going to find mid-season. Go ahead and replace those parts if needed. And if they're not damaged, go ahead and tighten them, as it's possible there's a loose connection in that coax. If you've not raised the antenna, go ahead and raise it. We talked about bringing the bicycle flags or any other tall piece that you can go ahead and tie that antenna to get it above the canopy. Elevate that antenna as much as you can, because it's very important to have a good and solid line of sight. And go ahead and another test you can do here is take your phone out, and especially if it's on the same network, if your sensor and phone are both Verizon, go ahead and send an email from that site, as an email is going to use about the same data load as a sensor transmission would. So being able to send and receive an email is a great test of cellular strength on the site. Text message isn't a great test of it, because it doesn't use the same flow that the sensor would. So an email is the test I would use here. And if you have a hologram or AT&T sensor, you can go ahead and change the network here under sensor tools and search for another available network. And after you've gone ahead and done the troubleshooting, you can always validate the fix. On the same menu where we have the pre-install diagnostics, you can go ahead and run sensor diagnostics after you've gone ahead and done the test. And that should validate for you if it's able to transmit and everything's working for you. If your sensor's been offline for a longer period of time, more than a few days, go ahead and utilize the download data feature as well after this to catch up on data delays. Because if you're in a difficult cell location, it might take a few transmission bursts to catch up on that data. Whereas when you're right there, if you download that data, it'll be caught up immediately. We're going to turn it over here to Nick Stahl, who's going to take over the next part of this presentation. Nick, you're muted.
There we go. All right, got my screen.
Yep.
Cool. Back up here. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you guys our two important features that we have added. And these are both important and critical for the install and middle of the season. So the first one is related to set points. Just as a review, these are how the auto set points work, right? So you've got an initial um, value that the sensor is reading. So within a few days after install, the auto set points will set that full point based on what those readings are. And until the sensor demonstrates a full point that is higher because a rain or irrigation event occurred, that full point will stay. So in this example, the full point would have been adjusted on July 1st after this rain or irrigation event, and then it would have moved up to about this level. So that's how the auto set points work. So we'll preface that to a feature that we have added to make those auto set points smarter. Why did we make this feature? Primarily due to installs in dry soils. That posed a challenge because, again, if you look back at these graphs, if this moisture level at the time of install happened to be drier, significantly drier than what our true full point is, until we got a rain or irrigation event, it wasn't going to adjust on its own. So, you could run the risk of having your refill point be too low if the soil was dry at the time of install and you didn't adjust it manually. So to help with that problem and to increase the automation and your time efficiency, we built this feature. So now when you use the moisture level selection on the install form, it will automatically adjust that initial full point for you. So again, when you, as the installer, when you're filling out the install form, if you select one of these options, it will adjust that initial full point for you. And here's how that works. So currently, we've got the options mapping to three different categories or three different offsets, basically. The first is if you select oversaturated or full point, it basically just performs the same way that you're used to seeing. We think that the soil is full. We will assume that we don't need to move that full point any more than where it would already be. If you select optimal, um, we're going to adjust that full point up a little bit. And then if you select refill or any of these other options indicating that it's drier, it's going to adjust that full point even further. Another thing I do want to revert back to, one thing Ben mentioned was the offset options in terms of the depth of the sensor. So that's a separate thing that you can choose to do depending on how deep you want the sensor to go. This is an unrelated feature. So those two things aren't tied together or anything, but this is just you as an installer observing what the moisture level was at the time of install. And it's not exact, it's just some generic observations that you're making in order to make an adjustment on that initial full point. So what does this look like and how did we build it? If you select any of the options that map you to this refill category, basically what it's going to do is whatever that initial line would have been set based on those initial readings, it's going to make that the refill point. And then the full point will be much higher. If you select optimal, then it's going to put your sensor readings halfway, right? It's the midpoint. So you're going to have your full point and your refill point be halfway between your soil moisture readings. And then again, if you select full, it will behave just as it does today, or I should say before, where it will just continue to set that full point at its initial moisture value. So here's a couple other examples. So in this example, we would have selected refill at the time of install. So within the first few days, so we're only looking at a few days worth of data here, obviously not a lot of movement in that moisture graph. That's normal. You know, little plants don't use very much water. And if we didn't get any rain or irrigation during that time, you're probably just going to see a flat line for the first couple of days. And so our offset full point has been raised up to this level, and our current moisture is at the refill point. So that was if we selected refill. Here's what it would look like if we selected optimal. So again, it's going to make our moisture the midpoint between our full and refill line. And then here is an example where we selected full, where the full point is behaving how you have come to know it. Okay, the other big feature that I think our customer support team is probably as excited about as anybody is related to some new notifications that you will be receiving, or hopefully not receiving. So today, if you've got the most recent version of the app and your sensor becomes offline, you will receive notification. So before, you would have had to have looked in the app to see that there was a sensor offline. Now you will receive a notification according to your notification settings. And that will trigger 36 hours after its last transmission. So if it goes beyond 36 hours since its last transmission, it will change to an offline sensor and notify you. You'll also get a notification if the battery goes below 5%. And for the folks that may forget to deactivate their sensor at the end of the year after they've taken it out of the soil, we also developed a notification for that. So if we see that the sensor looks like it's been taken out of the ground, after a few days, we're going to say, hey, it looks like you took this out of the ground. Can you go deactivate it in the app? And we've also developed the notification for ET that will essentially send you a list of all your fields and what its ET was the previous day. I just want to iterate again to the points that Ben was talking about with looking at your transmission verification notifications. So when you install a sensor, you should get notifications that look just like this. So this left panel, what the QR was, what the field was, and what the username was, and then it gives you the battery and the volumetric water content of that first reading. That is important. And why that's important is because you don't want to miss a sensor that may have poor soil contact. So if you see something that looks out of place in terms of those volumetric water content values, that'll give you the chance to fix it right away. You can take the sensor out, drill a new hole, and hopefully fix that to where you've got a good contact with the soil and good measurements. So if you see something like 31, 15, 39, probably not a good, not good contact on that second sensor. All of these in this example kind of fall in line together. You know, they're plus or minus 5 or 10%. That's okay. If you're looking at something that's way different than the others, that's when you need to try another install. Any questions? I've got,
We have two right now.
okay, go ahead.
So Brian Bush asked, does completing the soil type dropdown aid the auto set points?
No.
Okay.
So good
And
question. And the reason because is like our sensor is an instrument, right? It's a measurement instrument, and it's not influenced by, like, what it's measuring is not influenced by, you know, like user input, right? It's just measuring the volumetric water content of that soil. And so uh you know, it's not going to affect the readings, therefore it's not going to affect how those auto set points calculate. The reason we have that there is simply just for your note-taking purposes, and if it's helpful for you to keep track of what kind of soil you might have manually observed at the time of install.
then the second question here is, will those auto set points continue to adjust through the season, or will it stay with the reference point you enter at install?
Good question. So essentially, it's going to stay at that offset unless otherwise proven higher, right? So if I select refill and I've got my full point way up high, if I do happen to get 2 inches of rain, 3 inches of rain, and I do see that my soil has held more, then it will adjust that for you. But until it is otherwise proven higher, it's going to stay at that level.
Those were the questions we had.
Good question. All right. I think we can turn it over to Tom and John, who are going to give you guys some more detailed info about CropX's actual ET. I'm going to stop and start the recording here.